so I don't forget to do this. There we go. And now I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that we can go ahead and jump into today's lesson. And so here we go. Today we're learning about the causes and effects of the Civil War. It is, gosh, like I was saying, we have today, and then we have next Wednesday and next Friday, and then we have an exam on Monday, June 1st, and then we're going to have a celebration on Wednesday, June 3rd. I still don't know what that celebration looks like, Mr. Hahn, but maybe we can all do a little bit of brainstorming and figure out what that celebration will be. Hang out, play games, look back on the year with Team Amazon. I'm not exactly sure, but I'm looking forward to it nonetheless. I will warn you that there is looks like a gardener on the hill behind my house. So if you hear my dog barking uncontrollably, it is because she is desperately trying to defend our property. So I just want to give you the heads up. Allie St. John says, wait, we have class next Friday? What? We do, because the Hart District scheduled class for next week instead of Monday, because Monday is a Memorial Day holiday. We have class scheduled Wednesday and Friday. Adi says, when will we do book return and get our yearbooks? So I believe that parents have gotten an email about textbook return. It is scheduled for next week. I know I'm a Rio Norte parent as well. And so I got the email, and remind me, because I know textbook return is next week. Does anybody know exactly when it is for next week for 8th graders? Emily is saying she thinks it's May 28th, so that would be next Thursday. Yeah, it's either 27th, 28th, or 29th. I'm not quite sure. And then Audie also asks, when are we getting our yearbooks? I believe, from what I understand, Rachel is saying textbook return is May 28th for 8th graders. So that would be next Thursday, May 28th. And Allie St. John says there's time by last name. Details on the library website. Hey, Thank you. Great teamwork, everybody. And Allie St. John says yearbooks are June 3rd. I've heard, this is just what I've heard from staff. I've heard that I think we're the only junior high school that's actually getting our yearbooks before the school year ends. Kudos to Miss Bretthauer and the yearbook staff, because they turned their stuff in on time, probably even turned it in early. You know that a lot of yearbook publishing plants have shut down during the quarantine. And so it's been shut down or partially shut down. So it's actually a lot of yearbooks, junior high and high school yearbooks, both are delayed. But I'm pretty sure, fingers crossed, I think I heard that ours will be here before, like Allie said, yearbooks are June 3rd, and you'll get more information. Your parents will send you more information. If I get that information, I'll pass it along as well. Okay. Hey, let's go ahead and get to the causes and effects of the Civil War. And then if you want, we can chat more about, all sorts of like end of the year stuff afterwards. Making good choices online. We're always doing this now, so I appreciate you. Thank you for being respectful and kind. Okay, so some announcements. Our Civil War unit exam is Monday, June 1st. And I want to explain this because there was a little bit of confusion. I think staff and students were confused by this. So I want to explain it. I put it out on Google Classroom yesterday, but I want you to hear it from me. And actually here, I will stop sharing my screen for a moment so you can, I can make sure to have your full attention. So the Hart District requested that teachers, if they were willing, teachers, could you please, after May 22nd, that's this Friday, after May 22nd, teachers, could you please, as a help to your students, could you please try your best to make sure that there are what are called hold harmless assignments after May 22nd? In other words, any work, assignments, homework, quizzes, tests, anything that happens after May 22nd, the Hart District is asking, please, teachers, could you please make it so that it can't hurt a student's grade, it can only help a student's grade. And so, of course, it's an option for teachers. Teachers can choose whether or not to do that. Teachers ultimately have a decision. They make the final call about their grading policies, and how they grade and what assignments they give. But I have decided to go ahead and follow the Hart District's recommendation, their request, that I don't have any assignments after May 22nd that could bring your grade down. So in other words, the study guide that you turn in can only help you, it can't hurt you. And the unit exam, it can only help you, it can't hurt you. Now, there are some students who are like, hey, wait a minute, Mr. Ippolito. Does that mean that I could just blow off this exam and not take it at all? Well, I'll be honest with you. If that's, if you've got other things going on in your life and you don't have the time to take, it's going to be about a 25 question exam. So if you don't have the time to take that, something's going on in your life. And honestly, there are some students who have been much more affected by the coronavirus than others. Some have even lost family members. And so, like, if you're focusing on other things, let's say you're focusing on trying to get your grade up in math or in English, and you're like, Mr. Ippolito, I need to stop focusing on history. Well, then I'm not going to be mad at you. Like I I understand. Aiden says, have a good summer, everyone. I'm out. And if that's, so I just want to do what is going to be best for you and your family. However, for those students who want to continue learning, I don't want to cheat you out of that education, right? I don't want to rob you and just say, you know what, after May 22nd, Mr. Ippolito, Mr. Hahn, we're just giving up. We're going to stop teaching and whatever. I don't want to have that attitude. I want to continue to teach you up until the very end and provide you with the same quality of, well, it's a little more challenging online, but try to provide you with as good a quality of history education as I possibly can. So we're going to go all the way up until the end. And then that exam that you take on Monday, June 1st it can only help your grade. It cannot hurt your grade. Okay. So I'm hoping that that's clear. Alexa, you have your hand up, and then I see a few more questions in the chat. And then I want to jump back into our agenda. Alexa, what's up?
I was going to ask about I was going to ask if our grade, I saw that you put on the Google Classroom announcement that the test, if you get below, what you have in the class, it'll just be excused in Infinite Campus.
Yes, that is correct. So if you take the test, and I encourage everyone to take the test, take the test, try it. You may be surprised. You may be like, hey, I did pretty well. That was great. If you don't do so well on the test, well, then it can't hurt you. It can only help you. And another good reason to take the test is just to find out, hey, how much did I actually learn? How much did I retain? How much do I know? So really, you're taking it truly as a test of your understanding to find out what you've learned, what you remember about the antebellum America and the Civil War. Everything that's on the study guide is what will appear on that exam. And for some people, there are some students who have D's right now. They're desperately trying to raise their grades. This exam could be a great way for them to raise their grade. Turning in that study guide can be a great way for them to raise their grade. So there are some students who are really, really, really invested in wanting to do really well on this exam. That's another reason why I'm not just going to give up now and go, forget it, I've stopped teaching. I want to provide a quality education and help every student to succeed, because I want you to do well, whether it's just to know that you learned it, or if it's actually to help improve your grade. Either way, I want to help all of my students. Emily Swift, you have your hand up.
So is this whole class kind of ends after this week? Is that for all classes or just history?
Well, so the Hold Harmless policy, that is a request that the Hart District has made of all teachers at all schools in the Hart District. Now, some schools, I've heard some high schools are like, whatever, hey, summer's starting early. That's just a rumor that I've heard. I don't know if it's true, because you know how rumors go. But I believe that there are some teachers who might go till the very end. You have graded assignments that can impact your grade positively or negatively up until the very last day of school. So I know there are some teachers at our school who have that philosophy, might have that attitude. So it is not a mandate. It is not the Hart District telling teachers, you must do this. It is the Hart District asking teachers, can you please be nice and follow this policy? And so, even if not all the teachers follow it, even if it's only some of the teachers, then you can take a little bit of a breather. Let's say, for example, that in your history class, Mr. Ippolito, Mr. Hahn, we're following the policy. Let's say in math, maybe you're not getting a break. Your math teacher is going to hold you right till the very end. Well, that just means that you can breathe a little easier in your history class and focus more of your attention on your math class. So again, it is a request of teachers. It is not a requirement. So you should check with every teacher to see what the hold harmless policy is, or just make it easy. Just try your best in all of your classes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Good question. Aiden, Asher says, is it all multiple choice? I think our plan right now is to do at least mostly multiple choice, and Asher, it could end up being all multiple choice. We'll know as we get a little bit closer. Catherine says this is applied to the study guide as well. Yes, the study guide can only help you. It cannot hurt you. If there is still Corona when it's the first day of school. Okay, so Nathan, I don't want to get too far into what happens back when we get back to school in August, because
we don't make those decisions.
We don't. Well, first of all, we don't make those decisions, and second of all, I don't have a crystal ball to look into the future. So if I had to guess, I'm guessing right now that it's going to be a hybrid. I'm guessing that we'll be in school part of the time, and then part of the time it's going to be at home distance learning still. But again, I can't look.
We don't know yet.
Yeah, so I don't know. We probably won't know until June or July. Braxton says, if we choose to do nothing else for this class, will our grade stay the same? It is now. Yes, Braxton, I will make my pledge to you that if you do nothing more other than nothing more, then your grade will be frozen, yes, as of this Friday.
I will say, however, though, if you do have missing assignments that you have not yet turned in, get them in as soon as possible before the end of this semester. That way you can boost your grade however much you need to get it up to where you want it, rather than just letting it stay where it is right now.
Yes.
Even though this final and what was it? Get your missing assignments in, and also if you really need this boost, I mean, we said the unit exam can only help you. It cannot hurt you. So there's major incentive there to take the exam, because even if you do bad, it can only help you here at this point. So
yeah. And Nathan asks, can we retake the test? Nathan, because the test can't harm you, I won't be doing a test retake. And the test is, it's June 1st. So so it will either it will help you or it won't help you. So, but no test retake for this, just because of the nature of, how late it is in the quarter. And then Jarek says, wait, so technically tomorrow. Jarek, if you want to look at it that way, I guess. But again, I can't, Jarek, it is so important. I cannot speak for other teachers and other classes and other subjects.
This is just for our class.
Yeah. So Jarek, I am telling you, as the history teacher, I have decided to go ahead and follow the Hart District recommendation to do hold harmless after Friday, May 22nd. But again, I would check with every teacher, just to make sure. Okay. Nathan is asking a lot of questions. Nathan, I'm going to answer your final questions. What are we learning from this live stream? Nathan, we're going to be jumping into the causes and effects of the Civil War today. So the rest of this is just our schedule of what's coming up. So I'll move on. And all right, so here we go. We're jumping into the causes and effects of the Civil War. And let me go ahead, and I'm actually just going to skip down to the end for a moment, just so you can see where, Mr. Ippolito, why am I doing this? What am I, for those of you following along on the study guide, it is right here. It is on page 2, causes and effects of the Civil War. So these are the 2 questions we're trying to answer right now. The first one, which is question 13, what were the main causes of the Civil War, and how do we get to the point where we're killing each other? And then number 14, how was our nation a different nation, a better nation, after the Civil War ended? So those are the questions that we are trying to answer. And so that's what we're going to try to do right now, causes and effects of the Civil War. All right. So the U.S. Civil War took place from 1861 to 1865, the costliest war ever fought on U.S. soil, and over 650,000 Americans were killed. Historians estimate that it was somewhere between 650 and 750,000. I'm just going to go ahead and load up this whole slide. There we go. It's tough, and if you're wondering why do we have so many different numbers, it's because the reporting of Civil War casualties during this time was much harder to do. than it is today. Today we do, and Mr. Hahn, maybe you can speak to this a little bit better than I can, but today we have much better accurate reporting of casualties, of the people who are like going into a battle, going into an engagement. And I think we do a better job of keeping track of all of our service members, and we just didn't have the ability to do that as much back during this time. Mr. Hahn, is that a fair assessment?
Yes, sir. We got computer systems in place nowadays that keep track of soldiers, and the soldiers going into every theater. And then what was it? So a unit goes into a theater with however many troops, say like BCTs around like 5,000, and then they come out and they report their losses, their casualties that are sent home, and that's all reported to the Department of Defense, who then release that news to the public. Via the press. So it's a lot more in-depth and detailed it is today, and a lot more. It's easier accountability wise today than it was back in that time.
Yeah. Another thing that was impacting the ability to count exactly, how many casualties there were, was the fact that, the Union had a reasonably good infrastructure, military infrastructure. The Confederacy, they weren't running with as much. They just didn't have the same resources and the same infrastructure, because the Confederacy as a country had only existed, since 1861. So their accounting, their record keeping was not as good. Mm-hmm. Nathan asks, would it be better to take notes on this or listen very closely and then write it down? Nathan, it's whatever's best for you, whatever's best for your learning style. So you decide how best you want to learn and take notes and process the information. Okay, I'm going to focus on 8 different reasons. Ultimately, you're going to decide what you think the biggest reasons and the most significant reasons were for why we got into the Civil War. But these are our 8 that we're going to be discussing today. So let's go ahead and we're just going to jump right into them, starting with, of course, there were several causes of the Civil War, but the greatest factor was slavery, right? And we're not going to dive deep into slavery, really, because we spent, what, Mr. Hahn, like 2 or 3 class sessions?
I believe so, yes.
Just learning about slavery. So I don't think we need to rehash slavery, but this was, and I think that most historians agree, that slavery and the dispute over slavery was the number one reason why we got into the Civil War, because the North and South had such different approaches to slavery. It was the basis of the economy of the South. The North did not believe in it. So slavery was the number one reason for the number one cause of the Civil War. But there were other causes as well. The next one is states' rights. So there's going to be a lot of information I'm going to throw out at you. This presentation is originally a presentation that I would have given over like a couple of block days. So I'm going to condense a lot of information down, but I'm still going to share all this with you. There are also, in this slideshow, there are embedded videos. Like if you want to learn more about this, then you can click on the links. There's information. Let me just hit exit really quickly. There's information down here in the notes. Whenever you see this down in the notes, these are clickable links. There is information in here. Anyway, there's so much more, but just for the sake of time, I'm just going to kind of give you the quick and dirty version of this. So part of this was the argument of states' rights versus federal authority, right? And this is an argument that still goes on today when it comes to like the coronavirus, for example. Have you noticed that different states have different responses? Have you been watching the news? Some states like California, like we completely, we went into full lockdown. Our state was the first state to go into full lockdown before any other state. The United States government, the president says something, governors say something different. There is still that conflict today between national authority and states' rights, between what the government of the United States says and what the governments of each individual state says. So that hasn't fully gone away. It all goes back to, if you look at the slide here, it all goes back to the Articles of Confederation. If you remember back when we were first a country, before we had the Constitution, we had the Articles of Confederation. And basically, the Articles of Confederation gave the states way more power, right? You remember, if you go all the way back now to our learning in August and September, you remember the states, they were the only ones that had the power to tax. The United States government couldn't tax. The United States government couldn't raise an army except during a time of war when it was already too late. Like the United States government had very, very little power. and the states had much more power. So there were some states that were still like, you know what? We miss those days of the Articles of Confederation. We miss those days when we were more, do you see this word right here? When we were more sovereign, when we were more independent. And so there were some states that still thought in the 1860s, 80 years after the Constitution had already been ratified, there were some states who thought, you know what? Yeah, we should be able to do our own thing. We should be able to do our own thing without the federal government telling us what to do. So again, this, and I'm just boiling this all down, there was this conflict, this argument over how much authority, how much power should we give to the federal government. Pretty much, the federal government won. After the Constitution was written and ratified, the federal government had more power under the Constitution than the states did. But again, there were some states that were still like hanging on to some of those arguments that, you know what, the states really should have the ultimate power. The states should have the ultimate authority in deciding what's best for their citizens. Okay, so states' rights, that is the second. We're going, we're going down the list. Slavery is one, states' rights is two. Let's talk about the economy right now, the differences in economy between North and South. So this is all review, right? We talked about the Southern economy. It was an agrarian economy. They relied on slave labor in the fields. And then with the invention of the cotton gin, you remember that the desire for slaves exploded in the Deep South, especially where they were growing a lot of cotton. So cotton became the biggest cash crop. More cotton fields were planted. Cotton is expanding. There was a phrase that went, "Cotton is king." In other words, cotton was the most profitable, the most profit-driving force in the South during this time, and it led to a vastly increased demand for slaves. The need for slavery grew. The Northern economy, on the other hand, this is just, again, some more review. It's driven by industry. There's no need for slaves because they're paying wages. Now, there were some that argued, well, these wage workers are in some cases treated worse than slaves. But the fact of the matter is that in the Northern economy, if you didn't like your job, you could quit and go to a different job. And in the South with slavery, you couldn't do that. So as North and South continue to grow apart, Northerners increasingly are growing against slavery, and the abolitionists, they start working towards ending slavery, and the South is working towards holding on to slavery. So this economic divide between the Northern economy and the Southern economy, it's pulling them apart. So, okay. So let's talk about the abolitionists. Again, this is review as well. These are just three of the abolitionists, right? And so get all of these, get all these in here. So the abolitionists, this was another cause of the Civil War because they were pushing, they were agitating, they wanted freedom for the slaves, for all of the slaves. They wanted immediate abolition, which means let's get rid of slavery altogether. So they were challenging what's called the status quo, right? Status quo is a Latin phrase. You may have heard it. Status quo, I'm going to spell it and put it in the chat here. Status quo. So status quo means let's keep things the way that they are. Let's not rock the boat. Let's keep things the way that they are. The South, the Southern slaveholders, the plantation owners, they wanted to maintain the status quo. Let's just keep things the way they are. But the abolitionists, they wanted to challenge that. They're like, no, the status quo is wrong. The way we're doing things right now is wrong. It is immoral. It is unethical. And they were also making that Christianity argument as well, that it was against the Bible. It was against God's law because according to the Bible, in the eyes of God, all people are created equal in God's eyes. Now, there were others who were pointing to parts of the Bible that supported slavery. And so the Bible was kind of used on both sides to support their own argument. Frederick Douglass, there he is right there. Harriet Beecher Stowe, Harriet Tubman. We've talked a lot about the abolitionists and the fugitive slave law in 1850. That accelerated the abolitionist movement because if you remember from the Ken Burns Civil War that we learned about, once the fugitive slave law was passed, then it forced people in the North to become slave catchers. They had to, like they were required by law. If they knew of a fugitive slave that was hiding in their neighborhood, they were required by law under that fugitive slave law to turn them in. So every Northerner now is a mandated slave catcher, and that drove some people in the North crazy. They hated that. Okay. Okay, the next cause is the question of the territory. So in other words, again, I'm just going to kind of fly through this. In other words, what should we do with the territories? We are expanding. You remember, what was that unit called? What's that unit where the thing, what's that called, what that thing called that pulls us to expand out to the west? What is that thing? Yes, manifest destiny. Good job. So under this idea of manifest destiny, we are pulled out to the west. We are expanding out to the west. We want to acquire more land out in the west. And you saw we acquired the Oregon Territory. We acquired the Mexican Cession during the Mexican-American War. We're getting all of this territory now out to the Pacific Ocean. So the big question is, what should we do with this territory? We're adding all this new land. Louisiana Purchase was the first one. Louisiana Purchase, and then Oregon Territory, and then the Mexican Cession and Texas. So is this land going to be slave, or is this land going to be free? Well, I'll show you a map here. So under the Missouri Compromise, there was this initial line here that said, you know what? Missouri will come in as a slave state, and we'll draw this line all the way from the Mississippi River here, all the way out to the Pacific Ocean. And everything north of that will be free, and everything south of that is eligible for slavery. And so there was this constant argument about like what should be slave, what should be free. And so this argument continued, and there was no settlement. The North was upset that slavery would be permitted in the new states. The North did not want the expansion of slavery. And the South, they were upset that Congress was trying to limit slavery at all. The South is like, you know what? Let's just maintain the status quo. Let us be, leave us alone. Let us do our thing. Okay. So the Kansas-Nebraska Act just made things worse because the Kansas-Nebraska Act kind of flipped. It basically invalidated the Missouri Compromise, and it just said, you know what? Whatever you want. Whatever you want. If more people move in here who want slavery, then we're going to make it a slave state. If more people move in here who want no slavery, then we'll make it no slavery. And that's when violence, you remember from the Ken Burns Civil War thing, we learned about Bleeding Kansas. John Brown, he murders 5 pro-slavery men. He hacks them to death. He takes a broadsword and hacks them to death in Kansas. And so fighting breaks out all over Kansas over this issue of slavery. Should Kansas be a slave state or a free state? And so the situation is getting more and more violent. Okay. Next thing is the Dred Scott Supreme Court case. I'm not going to spend too much more time on this because this is also something that you've learned about already in the Ken Burns Civil War video. Basically, Dred Scott was a slave that was taken to a free territory, right? So he was originally from Missouri, and then he was taken to, I want to say Minnesota. He was taken to a free territory. I forget which territory, but his slave owner took him to a place where slavery was outlawed. He then filed a lawsuit where he said, you know what? I was taken into a place where slavery is illegal. As soon as that happened, I should have been set free because slavery was outlawed there. The Chief Justice, Roger Taney, he said, first of all, you're a slave, so you don't even have the right to sue in court. So you shouldn't even be here. You have no rights that the United States government should respect. Second of all, even if you were free, you're not a U.S. citizen, so you can't sue. You can't sue in court. You're a slave, so you can't sue. African Americans are not citizens, so they can't sue. You don't get to go into a territory. So, and Congress basically said that they cannot prohibit slavery anywhere in the Western territories. Which once that, let me say that one more time. The Supreme Court declared that Congress could not declare any territory free. So once you become a state, then you can decide whether or not you're going to be free or slave. But the U.S., the federal territories, Congress has no authority on what you do with your property in a United States territory. So basically, Missouri Compromise is completely invalidated. There's no point even to the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Like, it's all out the window, and anti-slavery Northerners are losing their minds because now the Supreme Court has basically said, you know what? If you're a slave owner, you should have all the power in this country, essentially. They were losing their minds after the Dred Scott case in 1857. Then finally, we get to 1859. This is John Brown's raid. And again, you've already learned about John Brown, so just a quick review. He was an abolitionist. He fought in Bleeding, Kansas, planned a rebellion in Harper's Ferry, Virginia. If you recall from the story, because we've told this story a couple times now, including in the Ken Burns Civil War video, he was planning this massive slave uprising. He was going to seize the federal armory. An armory is where you keep weapons. And he was going to arm all the slaves in Virginia, and there was going to be this massive slave revolt all across the South that was going to start in Virginia. Well, that didn't quite work out. The slaves did not come out to meet him, but the angry townspeople did come out to greet him. And so he was executed. It failed. He was captured and executed for treason. And of course, this is the first time, you'll remember, because we talked about this, this is the first time that a white man is willing to sacrifice his life over slavery. And this is the first time that a white man is inciting violence in the name of like a slave rebellion. And so now the South is losing their minds. Like, oh my gosh, my slaves are going to murder me while I sleep. This has to stop. We cannot continue this. This is ridiculous. Something has to happen. The North viewed him as a martyr. A martyr is someone who dies for their beliefs, right? And the South begins militarizing. All right. Whew. Now, the thing that finally pushes the South over the edge is the election of Abraham Lincoln. So the Republican Party, I'll just populate this. The Republican Party is formed in 1854 following the Kansas-Nebraska Act. These are Northerners who do not want slavery to spread into the Western territories. So this begins the Republican Party. The Republican Party that still exists today in 2020, it started back in 1854, and Abraham Lincoln is the first president to be elected from the Republican Party. Well, Abraham Lincoln had made it very clear that he does not believe in the expansion of slavery in the territories. And so the people in the South were like, if Abraham Lincoln wins, then this is going to be the straw that breaks the camel's back, if you've heard that expression before. In other words, this is going to be the thing that really, once and for all, that pushes us. John Brown's raid, that was close. If Abraham Lincoln gets elected president, if an anti-slavery person gets elected president, it will be the last straw. It's going to be the thing that finally just like causes us to break. Well, he wasn't even on the ballot in like 10 states in the South. They refused to even put him on the ballot. And yet he still won because the states of the North, had vastly more electoral votes than the states in the South. Emily, you have your hand up.
Wait, what does secede mean? Is that when you leave the country, or just like, I forgot what it meant. What does it mean again?
Yeah, so secede means you're packing up and you're leaving. So South Carolina was the first state to secede, which basically meant they were leaving the country. They declared themselves independent of the United States. We are no longer going to be a part of this country. That is not our president. We are leaving. We are out of here. And then Mississippi, Texas, Louisiana, Alabama, Georgia, and Florida seceded after them. So that's a total of 7, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that's 7 states. So 7 states left at first. And then after Fort Sumter, you remember Mr. Hahn taught us last week about Fort Sumter. Was it last week or Monday, Mr. Hahn? It was last week, right? Battles of the Civil War.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So after the firing of Fort Sumter, which was the first like military engagement, the first military action, the first attack of the Civil War, the spark that started the Civil War, then 4 other states seceded. It was Virginia and Tennessee and 2 others. North Carolina. What am I missing in there? Virginia, Tennessee, North Carolina, and 1 other. Anyway, 4 more states seceded after the action at Fort Sumter. And so they all come together to form the Confederate States of America. So when we talk about the South, we talk about the Confederacy. It is this new country that they created, that they believe that they created, called the Confederate States of America. So that's what happened when states decide to secede, then that is called secession. That's the same thing. So Nathan, we're going to get to, that's emancipation is a different vocab term we're going to get to later, but I see you in the chat there. Okay, so then the Civil War begins. And so Fort Sumter, the attack on Fort Sumter, again, this is just review. that was where the Civil War began. These are the Confederate states here initially before the attack on Fort Sumter, right? And then North Carolina, Tennessee, Virginia, and Arkansas. There's the fourth. There were 4 more states that seceded after Fort Sumter: Arkansas, Tennessee, North Carolina, Virginia. Those are the 4 that went after. Asher says the worst country name ever. Well, Asher, you know what? To be fair to the Confederacy, they wanted to capture. They wanted to like go back to the old days of our nation under the Articles of Confederation, right? A confederation is a loose collection of states where ultimately the states have the most authority and the states have the most power. So they didn't want to be united. They were just happy to be the confederated, right? Just like they're like buddies, they're like friends, but not locked together, right? So that's kind of the difference between a union and a confederation. Is a confederation is, people have a little bit more autonomy to kind of do their own thing. No, secede, Nathan, secede doesn't mean to give up. Secede means to leave, to withdraw, to take yourself out of the country. Okay. So again, the 8 causes of the Civil War, you can see them right here. Slavery is number 1. States' rights versus federal authority, economic and cultural differences, abolitionism, the argument over the territories, the Dred Scott case, John Brown's raid, and the election of Abraham Lincoln. So here's what I'm going to throw at you really quickly, and you can respond in the chat because I want you to be able to interact a little bit. I've been talking a lot. Besides slavery, which I think we can all agree is the number 1 cause. I think we can all agree on that. Look at these other 7 here on your list. Which of these other 7 do you think was the next biggest cause of the Civil War? Think about it. Throw your answer in the chat, and we can kind of talk about that. So take a moment. AC, you're saying 6. I don't know what 6. I'm assuming, do you mean the Dred Scott case? I'm not sure. And Noah, to answer your question, the study guide can only help your grade. It can't hurt your grade. All right. I see some good responses here. Yep. Does anyone... Yeah, Catherine asks, aren't abolitionists and slavery kind of the same thing? Well, Catherine, they're all kind of related, right? Just like the economic differences, the main part of the economy for the South was slavery. So they're kind of interconnected for sure. Allie St. John, if you're willing to talk to us, I'm curious, why do you say the election of Abraham Lincoln, Allie St. John?
Because that is what really made the South mad.
Okay, I hear you. I hear you. Anyone else want to talk about their answer, defend their answer, or share what you talk a little bit more about what you talked about in the chat? Maybe Kira. Kira, do you want to talk about states' rights? Kira Meacham.
Okay, so yeah, states' rights. It was basically like in the beginning when the United States first became the United States, everyone was like the South was fighting to have like equal rights and for the states, and like how all the states should have power and the central government should have less power and all that. And so like that's kind of been their thing all the way up until the Civil War. They were still trying to get that power, to get their government, like the state government, to have power instead of the federal government. So it was like they wanted that. Yeah.
Yeah, Kira, it's interesting you mentioned that because we're also, again, going back to what we're experiencing today. I don't know if you saw the video from Instagram, the guy who got into an argument with the guy in Costco. Did anybody happen to see that? The Costco argument with the guy who wouldn't wear the mask into Costco. Anybody happen to see that? I'll share for you, for those who didn't see it. So essentially this guy is, he claims to have over 3,000 Instagram followers, and he's in Costco, and he's gonna like shame this Costco employee. And so he's got his phone, and he's like shooting video of this Costco employee, because the Costco employee is very politely asking him, "Sir, can you please wear a mask?" And he says, "May I ask, why aren't you wearing a mask?" And the guy responds, the guy who's holding his phone is like, "Because I woke up in a free country. That's why I'm not wearing a mask." And so we're having this argument still today even with like governors, like state authority versus local authority, right? Because there are some people, and you've seen them here in Santa Clarita. I know I have seen them. There are some people who are still right down the hill from me. Mr. Hahn, do you ever drive past Route 66 over here in the movie theater shopping center?
Yes.
There is a group of people almost every day at Route 66 every evening that they hang out. They're not wearing any masks. They're hanging out. They're chatting with each other. They're having, they're eating their food from Route 66. And so they're like, these regulations, these rules are ridiculous. I live in a free country, just like Asher said. I live in a free country, and so you shouldn't try to tell me what to do. And so these arguments that were being made back during the time of the Civil War, these are similar arguments that are still being made today, if you think about it, right? Like, on the one hand, there are Southerners who are like, you know what, it's my right, it's my property, it's my right. You don't tell me what to do with my property and my life. This is a free country. But then others would argue, well, but wait a minute. You're trying to argue for the freedom to enslave other people. So, yeah, you're arguing for freedom for yourself to have slaves, but you are taking you're taking other people's freedom away. In the argument over, masks and being a free country today, there are some people who are like, you know what, it's a free country. I shouldn't have to wear a mask if I don't want to. I should be able to hang out with whoever I want to. I should be able to congregate in a large group. If I want to go to church with 150 people, I want to be able to do that. And there are other people who argue, well, but when you do that, you can contribute to spreading a virus that can then harm other people. So this argument is still going on today. The states' rights argument, this local control argument, the argument is not going away. Nathan brings up a really good point. Isn't Costco private property? Nathan, you're exactly right. And Costco, as a private business, can make whatever rules they want to about their private business. Janessa, go for it.
So I think the main cause of the Civil War was slavery, because number one, it pretty much started everything. And number two, the election of Abraham Lincoln was a pretty big one, and people were upset of Abraham Lincoln's presidency and the election, because he supported the idea of no slavery, which made a lot of people upset, which also fired things up. So behind all those reasons, I think slavery was the main reason why the Civil War really happened.
Well, you're exactly right. And really it comes down to an argument of freedom. At that time, it came down to an argument of freedom. The Southern whites wanted the freedom to own slaves. But people in the North, and obviously the slaves were like, but wait, what about freedom for the slaves? Because we're humans and we deserve our freedom. Today, we're still having an argument over freedom. Should people have the freedom to just move about wherever they want to, with a mask, without a mask, congregate, go to a restaurant, whatever? I don't know if you saw the news where in Crazy Autos, there's the Crazy Autos location over in Valencia. It's on the way to the freeway on Match Mountain Parkway. Crazy Autos, there's another location here in Canyon Country, but Crazy Autos, they just decided, the one in Valencia, they decided, you know what, we're just going to open up. And we think this is stupid. We think this is ridiculous. People deserve their freedom. And so they opened up and they had a restaurant full of people, packed with people hanging outside, people wearing masks, some people not wearing masks. And they got shut down. And so again, the question is, whose rights, whose freedom are we fighting for? there is, on the one hand, people are arguing we have the right to work, we have the right to make a living, we have the right to have an economy functioning again. On the other hand, there are people who say, you know what, when we don't take these safety measures, then people's right to like live their life can be taken away, because you're putting people at greater risk of death by opening up the economy too quickly. So it's certainly not an argument we're going to settle today. And I know some of you have very passionate beliefs on this. But I just want to throw that out there and kind of try to make that connection between some of the arguments that we were having back in the 1840s, 1850s, 1860s, and the arguments we still continue to have today. Catherine says the Southerners were worried about economic problems because if slavery was taken away, it would limit the amount of money they made because they would get less work done. Of course, they were worried about economic collapse. What would happen if slavery were taken away from them? Because their entire economy was based on slavery. Now, they did end up, Sawyer, after the war, they ended up converting their economy. They had to, because the slaves were set free. But instead, they went to a system of what's called sharecropping, where essentially it was almost like slavery, except it wasn't. So they paid the slaves very, very little, and they had to they were sort of bound to the land, almost like medieval Europe. They were kind of bound to the land. They had to, they had to rent space on the land. So very, very similar to medieval Europe was the system of sharecropping that happened after the Civil War. Sophia Limon, you have your hand up.
Yeah. So, wait, can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
So I think that like the biggest thing that pushed the Civil War was the election of Abraham Lincoln, like Janessa said. I think that these were all like huge reasons, obviously, like, states' rights and economic and everything like that. But I think that a lot of people in the South saw Abraham Lincoln as kind of like this like monster that was going to take away everything. Like slavery was a huge right to them, like at least that's what they saw. Like slavery was rights to them, and that since he was an abolitionist in a way, like at least he supported the abolitionists, that he was going to take that away from them. And I think that they've been like fighting for states' rights ever since ever since like we became a country. So like I think that states' rights is also a huge thing, where they always wanted states' rights. But I think that because Abraham Lincoln was elected, they saw that they were going to get like everything taken away from them, so they might as well just create their own country and move away.
Yeah, I believe you're right. I think that they saw that they were that they were kind of backed into a corner, I think is the way that they felt. Okay. A lot of discussion going on in the chat. Mr. Hahn, thank you. We're going to refocus. So really, really quickly, we're going to switch from the causes of the Civil War, and now I want to just switch over to the effects of the Civil War. And I want to apologize if you can hear the gardeners in the background. They normally come after our class is all done. They're a little bit early today. So so I will try my best to speak over the sound of the people mowing our lawn. So the effects of the Civil War, I narrowed this down to 6 because I just wanted to kind of wrap this up really quickly. First of all, the first one is we rethink and reinterpret the Declaration of Independence and what this phrase means, all men are created equal. In the last class, we talked about the Gettysburg Address and how Abraham Lincoln, the metaphor was that he switched our interpretation. He went into our back pocket, not real, it's a metaphor, but he went into the back pocket of America and he took out the old interpretation of the Declaration of Independence and he slipped in a new interpretation of the Declaration where we truly believe that all men are created equal. Like we're actually going to live up to the ideals of the Declaration of Independence. So that's one effect. The second effect is that African Americans are finally going to be equal in the eyes of the law. Now, there's still going to be some horrible treatment of African Americans, but there's a huge step forward. There were 3 amendments that I want you to know about. The 13th Amendment, that's going to get rid of slavery for good. The Emancipation Proclamation sort of did it, but it was more of a temporary wartime measure. The 13th Amendment ends slavery for good all over the country. The 14th Amendment guarantees citizenship to all, regardless of your skin color. And the 14th Amendment is still used in law today. When you get to your 11th grade U.S. history class and your 12th grade government class, you're going to study the 14th Amendment much, much more because the 14th Amendment guarantees what's called equal protection under the law for all citizens. So this equal protection clause is going to be used all over the place. 14th Amendment was used to guarantee the right of a woman to have an abortion in Roe versus Wade in 1973. The 14th Amendment is going to be used to guarantee the right for marriage equality, regardless of whether it's opposite sex or same-sex marriage. So that's going to be used in the Supreme Court. So it's going to come up, this 14th Amendment right. It's used in the Brown versus Board of Education Supreme Court decision in 1954, where originally, like, kids were segregated in the South. You may have heard of this. African-American children had to go to black schools, and then white kids got to go to the better white schools. There's segregation, drinking fountains and restrooms and restaurants and buses. They were all segregated. And it's the 14th Amendment later on in our country's history that's going to be used to help break those things down as well. And then finally, the 15th Amendment is the right to vote regardless of color. So after the 15th Amendment, African-American men could vote. That's an important distinction because women will still not be able to vote until the 19th Amendment passes in 1920. So African-American men are able to vote in America before women are able to vote in America. We eventually get to that point in 1920. The third effect, women play a much larger role in the Civil War than in any other previous role. This woman right here, and her name escapes me, but this is a woman who is disguised as a man who signed up to fight in the Civil War. One of many women. Of course, women in combat was illegal. It was not allowed at this time. But more and more women are signing up to, they're pretending they're men. It's kind of a Mulan moment, right? They're pretending they're men, and by the hundreds, we estimate, and maybe even by the thousands, but at least by the hundreds, women are disguising themselves as men. Mulan and Joan of Arc. You're right, Emily. Deborah Sampson Sawyer, thank you. So they're disguising themselves as men so that they can fight for their country, fight for the cause that they believe in. And so women are going to gain a little bit more equality after the Civil War. Not full equality, mind you, but they're going to gain a little bit more equality as a result of the Civil War. The fourth effect is that it shows the gruesome effects of modern warfare. Not to get too much into military history, but before the Civil War, guns were kind of a joke. Rifles, well, Mr. Hahn, correct me if I'm wrong, because
Sure.
I'm not a military historian, but the rifle, there's a difference between a musket and a rifle. Like a musket has a smooth bore, like a smooth barrel, right?
Yes, sir.
And then a rifle, it's actually like there's like a spiral inside.
Spiraling grooves inside the bore of the weapon, so that it spins the projectile as it travels down the length of the barrel, so that it makes it more accurate.
Yeah. So similar to the way, like when a quarterback throws a football, when you put a spiral on the football, it helps it to go straighter. Those rifling grooves inside these rifles help the bullet to go straighter. So Revolutionary War, War of 1812, Napoleonic Wars, like all of those wars in the past that had guns, you'd fire your gun and boo, the bullet might go boo, boo, any which way. With these rifles, these new rifled barreled guns, these new guns are deadly accurate. Like you could, aim and fire at someone across a field, and before you'd be like, well, this might hit, it might not, but like they were deadly accurate. So weapons get much more sophisticated, weapons get much more accurate. And this is also our first photographed war too. So war is more deadly, and we actually are witnessing the effects of war, the gruesome effects of war. Nathan says, do muskets have a knife at the end? So that's called a bayonet. The bayonet that was fixed at the end of the barrel of those rifles, that bayonet was when you got so close to the enemy that it was actually faster, because still during the Civil War, you could only load and fire about 3 rounds a minute, right? So these weapons are still, even though they're more accurate, they're still slow, because you're still having to like fiddle with gunpowder, and you have to pack it down and put the bullet in separately. Today, bullets, Mr. Hahn, again, I'm not, you're probably more familiar with this than I am. Bullets today have a shell, like a shell casing, and
they're all self-contained cartridges now, and brass, and it's all manufactured together instead of with brass, and projectile and the powder and all that. Back in the day, they had to do it all themselves. They would take the end of the rifle, pour in the powder at the very top, and then pack a bullet in there wrapped in paper so that it can grip the barrel, and then use a ramrod to pack it all down to the very bottom, and then place a primer on the firing mechanism of the rifle, and then kablam. That takes 20 seconds to do if you're very well trained. 3 shots a minute.
Yes, and you have to do that while being shot at.
Mm-hmm.
So
yes,
yeah, it's very stressful. It's very nerve-wracking. And so if someone is so close to you, like if they're going to get to you in less than 20 seconds, then you stop trying to reload your rifle with the, getting the gunpowder in there, packing it down. Like you just stop that. You just, you get your rifle with the bayonet at the end, and you're now going to do hand-to-hand combat, and you're going to like try to use it more as a sword, as a dagger, than
as a spear.
A spear, really. Yeah, right. So that's why those bayonets were fixed at the end of the rifles. Mr. Hahn, do Army guns, rifles today, do they still have bayonets?
Yes, we still use bayonets today. What was it? I went through, when was it? I think it was 2012, late 2012, 2013. We went through a day of bayonet training, and then we turned them in and didn't use them anymore because, well, they're still weapons, and well, you're not. I totally understand when they took them away, because you're not going to give a bunch of recruits some of whom it was their first instance away from home, an edged weapon like a bayonet to hold inside the barracks. So yeah, we went through the training with them, and then we turned them back in afterwards, and then we were done with them, and then yeah.
Cool. Okay, 2 more things that I want to talk about. The final 2 effects of the Civil War. First of all, it made possible the enormous economic expansion of the 50 years that would follow the Civil War. So now that once slavery ends, and it's actually, of course, initially at the very beginning, it's devastating. The war itself is devastating for the Southern economy, but the South actually starts to develop industry. Like the South actually starts building factories. The South actually, their economy, not all over the South, but in many places in the South, in places like Texas, in Georgia, in Louisiana, like there are parts of the South that are like, you know what, we really should modernize. This is a good opportunity for us. And so you do see manufacturing and industry start to take place in various parts of the South. My family and I, we visited Georgia a year and a half ago, and learned all about the post-Civil War, like renaissance of Georgia, particularly of Atlanta. We went to the Coke, the place where Coke was founded, and learned all about that. Like there was this huge economic boom after the Civil War, in the North especially, but also in parts of the South as well. And this is what's going to place us on the world stage going into, and again, this is all stuff you're going to learn in U.S. history in 11th grade, but going into World War I, where we enter in 1917, and then again in World War II, when we enter that in 1941, we are going to be a leader on the world stage. Whereas before, we were just one of many. Other countries of Europe could be considered like more powerful. But we really, going into World War I in 1917, 50 years after the Civil War, we emerge as a world leader and as a world power. And then finally, the last thing is it unifies us and unites us as a nation. Now, you might look at the state of our country today. I'll turn this off now. You might look at the state of our country today and you might go, yeah, I see people arguing and fighting all the time, and I don't feel like our country is very unified. But it really, before we would stay, the phrase would go, the United States are a nation. The United States are a country, right, in the plural. After the Civil War, and still today, we use the phrase, the United States is a country. In other words, we switch from the plural, the United States are, to the United States is. The United States is a great nation. The United States is one nation, one country. And so we still have our problems. Our nation is not perfect, but we're definitely, we are, we are better. I would argue that we are a better country than we were before the Civil War. Emily says, America today is like the opposite of unity. There's definitely a lot of argument, a lot of debate in our country. I don't know if we're at the point of civil war, though, because for the most part, thankfully, we're still pretty peaceful. We argue. There's a lot of argument on Facebook and on Twitter, and the occasional kerfuffle at a Costco that gets posted on Instagram.
Yeah, but then with that, everybody's pretty much. There's a phrase that I've heard. It's just that everybody's a thug on the internet. So it's just like, okay, well, so long as they're not shooting at each other and killing each other in person, I mean, you can say whatever you want.
Well, and we're seeing protesters. Somebody mentioned, I think it was maybe Asher who mentioned the protests in Huntington Beach. There are protesters in Michigan that were like armed protesters that were in front of the state capitol. But fortunately, violence didn't break out. They had their guns just to demonstrate their right to own a gun and their right to carry a weapon. We're thankfully not at the point where violence is breaking out like what broke out in Bleeding, Kansas. I didn't even mention the story, the Brooks-Sumner debate. So I'll tell you this story really quickly, and then we'll wrap things up. So this happened in Congress, and I think, was this in Ken Burns' Civil War? Did they mention this?
I think it was like one of those. It was like for all of 30 seconds that they might have.
Yeah. So I'll tell you the story. So Senator Charles Sumner from Massachusetts, he is on the floor of the Senate, and he is giving a speech. This is in the mid 1850s. 1854, 55, 56, something. He is giving an impassioned speech on the floor of the United States Senate, speaking out against slavery, talking about the evils of slavery. And Representative Preston Brooks, he's in the House of Representatives. He is a representative from South Carolina. He somehow, I don't know if Sumner insulted his brother or his cousin or something, or maybe just insulting the South in general.
He was insulting the institution of slavery and the South's association with it, saying that if slavery was a woman, and it was some really choice words, I should say. And we'll leave it at that.
So Preston Brooks takes his cane. This is a younger man, by the way, younger than Senator Charles Sumner. Senator Brooks takes his cane, walks across the Capitol building from the House side over to the Senate side, and on the floor of the United States Senate starts beating Senator Charles Sumner over the head with his cane. Sumner is bleeding, like he is bleeding on the floor of the Senate. I now need to pull up this image so that I can fully illustrate this. I'm trying to go to Google Images right now. Brooks Sumner. Yeah. So let me. He totally needed to calm down. So let me find an image, because this is final story I'll share with you here. There we go. Open image in new tab, and let me share this with you so that you can see this, because this was crazy. There we go. So you see this. This is like it's a drawing of what happened. There were no cameras on the floor of the Senate at this time. So there is Charles Sumner with his quill pen in hand, and here is Representative Preston Brooks. You can see the ink has fallen over here, toppled off of the desk. I can only assume this cane still has like little branches sticking off of it, and you can see like Senator Sumner is bleeding here as he is laying on the ground, and of course nobody's coming to help him. They're all arguing with each other. Some of them are watching and smiling and laughing. So there's a lot of argument. There's a lot of like shade that gets thrown on Twitter. But at least we don't have members of Congress beating each other, physically beating each other in the United States Capitol building, like what happened in
Mhm.
in the 1850s. So yes, and Asher says Southern farmers gave Senator Preston, he gave the Representative Brooks new canes. They like he broke his cane, finally broke his cane, beating Senator Sumner so much, and so they sent him new canes. He was reprimanded and he was voted out of the House of Representatives for committing an act of violence against another member of Congress. The people from his district in South Carolina voted him back in. That was how crazy that whole thing was. All right, Mr. Hahn.
Yes, sir.
What? So I think here's what we're gonna do now. This is my call to action to you after all this, and thank you so much. By the way, we have 41 people who are still sticking around. Your call to action now is simply to go and get this done. Answer these 2 questions. Some of you may have already done this. You're going to answer questions 13 and 14 down here at the bottom, page 2 of your study guide. It might be on page 3 now if you've started answering some other questions. But that's where it is. That's your call to action. And anything else, Mr. Hahn?
Do not think so, sir. I think we're good.
Okay. All right. So, folks, thank you so much for sticking around. Thank you for joining us. And if you want to stick around and ask any questions, then we're happy to have you stick around. Otherwise, this is the time where you can respectfully say goodbye, and you've gotten everything. And thank you so much. And have a wonderful day. And we'll see you next Wednesday.